Hello, AP Environmental Science. This unit is about land, public and private, the land use concepts and how we classify them, and land management practices. In land use concepts and classifications, humans value land for what it can provide, like food, shelter, and resources, maybe just its overall intrinsic beauty. However, human use of the land for these purposes can create problems, some of which can be prevented, and we need to address those regulations. In land management practices, whether resources are conserved or overexploited just depends on the number of factors that are related to like economics, human behavior, and specific management practices. So proper resource management also depends on specific aspects of the type of land that's involved, as well as the agencies and guidelines. So, who owns a tree anyway? This is the case of Julia Butterfly Hill versus Maxim. For most of its history, Northern California Pacific Lumber Company was the leader in environmental stewardship. It pioneered the practices of selectively cutting some trees on its lands while leaving nearly most other trees intact. So unlike usual practices of clear cutting trees from one area of the land, selective cutting allows the roots of the remaining trees to retain water and hold the soil in place. So in addition, the surviving forest can regrow more closely to look like the original forest that was there. Pacific Lumber developed a 100-year sustainable logging plan to ensure the relative healthiness of the forest as well as job security, for the people and the families and the loggers who worked there. In 1986, Pacific Lumber was purchased by new owners. That company was renamed Maxim. Alright, so in order to increase the revenue of the company's land holdings, the new management clear-cut hundreds of thousands of acres of redwood forest in California. So because the new harvesting method removed vegetation and tree roots, Maxim's practices left the forest susceptible to soil erosion and landslides. And in December, the end of December 31st, 1996, an immense landslide began to steeply slope over Maxim's site above the town of Stafford, California, and it basically came down, destroying a number of homes and drastically altering that natural landscape. The land near this landslide, the uncut land, was also owned by Maxim. This area was still home to the largest remaining intact forest of ancient redwood trees, as well as a number of endangered species. Environmental activist Julia Butterfly Hill was appalled by what Maxim had done to this forest. Her response was to do what we call a tree sit. And so on Maxim's land, she organized a direct action group, what they called Earth Forest. So the ultimate goal of a tree sit is to remain in a tree long enough to save it from logging. Although many such actions merely delay, which is the inevitable, which is the clear cutting. Still, activists support tree sits because they gain time for further legal proceedings and increase media awareness. Julia Butterfly Hill provided an indomitable. In her most famous tree sit, she occupied Luna, which is a 55-meter, 180-foot redwood tree that was nearly 1,000 years old. She pledged to remain in that tree until Maxim agreed to spare the tree. She spent 2 years in that tree without coming down once, staying through gale-force winds, 2 winters, intimidating tactics, the death of other activists, and the removal of most of the trees in the stand where she occupied that tree. Julia's efforts were rewarded when Maxim agreed to protect Luna. They also agreed to protect a 61-meter or 200-foot buffer around the actual tree in this stand. In a separate, complex deal that included many stipulations about logging and practices, Maxim and other companies also agreed to sell the U.S. government 3,055 hectares or 7,500 acres of this ancient forest, and the agreed price was $480 million. That property has now become the Headwaters Forest Reserve. Essentially, Hill's actions cost Maxim millions of dollars in delays, lost revenue, but what it did was it brought unsustainable logging practices to the attention of people. And a large debt from Maxim forced them to file bankruptcy in 2007. And its depleted assets were reorganized and transferred to a new company in 2008. Maxim's logging practices appeared to place profit before sustainability. The new company, though, appeared to have implemented more sustainable practices with the trees that remain in those holdings. The conflict over logging practices raised dozens of questions. Do citizens of the United States have the right to influence the activities that occur on private lands? What if the land is public? Was Julia Butterfly Hill a hero or is she a villain? See, some people see her as having made a personal sacrifice to save an ancient tree and to bring the issue of unsustainable logging practices to the public's attention. Others see her as a lawbreaker. She trespassed on private property in the efforts to prevent illegal activity. So, as we talk about land use and how we classify it, take into account all of these things, all of these questions. You know, is it worth risking your life, breaking the law, to prove a point?